17-year-old Sophia had always been different from other kids her age. While her friends spent hours scrolling through social media or hanging out at the mall, she found peace in her small bedroom, surrounded by canvases, paintbrushes, and the smell of acrylic paint. Her room looked like a rainbow had exploded inside it. Every wall was covered with her artwork. Some pieces were bright and happy, showing sunsets over the ocean or children playing in parks. Others were darker, showing stormy skies or lonely figures walking down empty streets. Sophia's mom, Carmen, worked incredibly hard to keep their small family going. Every morning at 5, she would leave their tiny apartment to start her first job cleaning offices downtown. Then, after a quick lunch break, she would rush to her second job at the hospital, mopping floors and emptying trash cans until late at night. Carmen never complained, but Sophia could see the tiredness in her mother's eyes every evening when she finally came home. Despite their struggles, Sophia felt lucky. She had her art, she had her mom, and she had dreams of maybe going to art school someday. She would often sit by her bedroom window, sketching the people walking by on the street below, imagining their stories and turning them into colorful paintings. Art wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. Sophia had been feeling tired for weeks, but she thought it was just stress from school. She had been getting bruises that seemed to appear out of nowhere, and sometimes she felt dizzy when she stood up too quickly. Carmen kept telling her to eat more vegetables and get more sleep, but deep down, both of them knew something wasn't right. The appointment at the local clinic was supposed to be routine. The doctor, a kind woman with gray hair and gentle hands, examined Sophia and decided to run some blood tests. She said they would call with the results in a few days and that it was probably nothing serious. Sophia and Carmen went home feeling relieved, thinking they had worried about nothing. But when the phone rang 3 days later, everything changed. Carmen answered, and Sophia could tell immediately that something was terribly wrong. Her mother's face went completely white, and her hand started shaking as she gripped the phone. When Carmen hung up, she sat down at their small kitchen table and cried harder than Sophia had ever seen her cry. The words that came next felt like they belonged in someone else's life, not theirs. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't wait for anyone to be ready. Sophia felt like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. This couldn't be happening to her. She was only 17. She had so many paintings she still wanted to create. So many places she wanted to see. The next few weeks became a blur of doctor appointments, medical terms she didn't understand, and forms that seemed to multiply every time they visited the hospital. Carmen had to take time off work, which meant less money coming in just when they needed more money than ever before. The insurance would cover some of the treatment, but there were so many extras, special medications, procedures that weren't fully covered, and treatments that the insurance company said were experimental. Sophia started chemotherapy on a cold Monday morning in November. She had read about it online and thought she was prepared, but nothing could have prepared her for how it actually felt. The medicine that was supposed to save her life made her feel like she was dying. She couldn't keep food down. Everything tasted like metal, and she was so tired that just walking to the bathroom felt like running a marathon. The worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was watching her mother try to stay strong while their world fell apart. Carmen would sit beside Sophia's hospital bed, holding her hand and telling funny stories from her cleaning jobs. But Sophia could see the worry lines getting deeper on her mother's face every day. Late at night, when Carmen thought Sophia was sleeping, she would step into the hallway to make phone calls about bills they couldn't pay. One evening, about 3 weeks into treatment, Sophia overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. Carmen was on the phone with the billing department at the hospital, and her voice was shaking as she tried to explain that she was doing her best, but couldn't make the payments they were asking for. The person on the other end must have been understanding because Carmen thanked them several times, but Sophia heard the number that made her stomach drop. $150,000. That's how much the treatment was going to cost beyond what insurance would cover. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling of her hospital room, thinking about all the paintings covering the walls of her bedroom at home. For years, people had told her that her art was special, that she had real talent. Her art teacher at school had even said she should try to sell some pieces at local craft fairs. Sophia had always brushed off those comments, thinking her art was just for fun, just for her. But lying there in that hospital bed, watching the IV drip slowly delivering medicine into her arm, Sophia had an idea that seemed both crazy and completely logical at the same time. What if she could sell her art to help pay for her treatment? What if those paintings that brought her so much joy could also bring them hope? When she brought up the idea to Carmen the next morning, her mother immediately said no. She didn't want Sophia worrying about money or feeling like she had to take care of things that adults should handle. But Sophia was persistent. She explained that creating art actually made her feel better, gave her something positive to focus on during the hardest days. And if people were willing to buy her paintings, why shouldn't they try? Finally, after several days of gentle arguing, Carmen agreed to let Sophia try. They would start small, maybe put a few pieces online or ask the nurses if any of them were interested. Neither of them imagined that this simple idea would lead to something that would change not just their lives, but the lives of many other people as well. Sophia spent the next few weeks creating new pieces whenever she felt strong enough to hold a brush. Some days she could only manage a few brush strokes before the exhaustion took over. Other days she felt almost normal and could work for hours. Her new paintings were different from her old ones. They had more emotion, more depth. She painted what it felt like to be scared but still fighting. She painted hope that felt fragile but refused to break. The nurses started to notice her artwork, and word spread quickly through the hospital. Soon doctors and visitors were stopping by her room just to see her latest painting. Everyone said the same thing. Her art had something special, something that made people feel less alone. Sophia began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her crazy idea might actually work. 3 weeks after Sophia first mentioned selling her art, she and Carmen stood outside Riverside General Hospital with a folding table borrowed from their neighbor, Mrs. Chen. The morning air was crisp and Sophia pulled her colorful headscarf tighter around her head. She had chosen the brightest one she owned, purple with yellow flowers, because she wanted people to see hope, not sadness when they looked at her. Setting up the display felt like the most important thing Sophia had ever done. Carmen helped her arrange the paintings on the small table, propping them against books and small boxes so people could see them clearly. They had brought 20 pieces. Some were paintings Sophia had created before getting sick, and others were new ones she had painted during her hospital stays. Each piece had a small white sticker with a price written in Sophia's careful handwriting. The prices had been the hardest part to figure out. Sophia didn't want to ask too much and scare people away, but Carmen reminded her that her art was valuable, and she shouldn't sell herself short. They finally settled on prices between $25 and $200, depending on the size and how long each piece had taken to create. The most expensive piece was a large painting of a tree with roots that looked like they were holding hands underground. It had taken Sophia almost a month to finish, working on it between chemotherapy sessions. Next to the paintings, they placed a handwritten sign that Carmen had helped make the night before. It read, "Original art by Sophia, help support cancer treatment." Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, "Every purchase helps a 17-year-old artist continue her fight." Sophia had wanted to make the sign herself, but her hands had been shaking too much from the medication to write neatly. The first hour was the hardest. People walked by quickly, focused on getting to their appointments or visiting sick relatives. Some glanced at the table but kept walking. Others stopped for a moment, looked at the sign, gave Sophia a sympathetic smile, and then continued on their way. Sophia tried to smile at everyone, even though her stomach was churning with nervousness and she felt dizzy from standing for so long. Around 10 in the morning, their first customer approached. She was a nurse from the children's wing, someone Sophia recognized from her treatments. The nurse, whose name tag read Linda, stopped and carefully examined each painting. She picked up a small piece showing a butterfly landing on a hospital window and asked how much it cost. $35, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Linda smiled and pulled out her wallet. "This is beautiful, honey. I'm going to hang it in the break room where all the nurses can see it. It'll remind us why we do what we do every day." That first sale felt like winning the lottery. Sophia's hands shook as she wrapped the painting in tissue paper, and Carmen had to help her make change from the $20 bills Linda handed over. After Linda walked away, Sophia sat down in the folding chair they had brought and cried happy tears for the first time in months. Word traveled fast through the hospital. By lunchtime, several more nurses had stopped by, and 2 families visiting patients had purchased small pieces. Dr. Peterson, Sophia's oncologist, bought a painting of a sunrise for his office, telling Sophia that it would help him remember to find light even on the darkest days. Each sale brought not just money but stories. People shared why certain paintings spoke to them, and Sophia began to understand that her art was doing something she had never expected. It was helping people process their own difficult experiences. The first week brought in just over $400. It felt like both a lot and very little at the same time. Sophia was thrilled that people actually wanted to buy her art, but she also knew that $400 wouldn't make much of a dent in their mountain of medical bills. Still, it was a start, and more importantly, it gave her something to focus on besides being sick. Carmen had to go back to work after that first week, so Sophia started setting up her table alone. Some days were easier than others. When she felt strong, she could stay outside for several hours, talking to people about her art and even doing small sketches for children who were scared about their own hospital visits. But other days, especially right after chemotherapy treatments, she could barely manage an hour before the nausea and exhaustion forced her to pack up and go home. The hardest days were when nobody bought anything at all. Sophia would sit behind her table for hours, watching hundreds of people walk by without stopping. On those days, she wondered if she was fooling herself, if her art really wasn't good enough, if she was just a sick girl with unrealistic dreams. Carmen would find her crying at the kitchen table on those evenings and would sit with her, holding her hand and reminding her that every artist faces rejection, and that the people who did buy her paintings proved that her work had real value. After 2 weeks, a reporter from the local newspaper approached Sophia's table. She was a young woman with curly hair and a kind smile, and she asked if she could write a story about Sophia's art sales. Sophia was nervous about being in the newspaper, but Carmen encouraged her to share her story, thinking it might help more people learn about her art. The article appeared in the community section the following Wednesday. It was titled, "Teen Artist Fights Cancer with Paintbrush and Hope," and it included a photo of Sophia sitting behind her table, wearing her purple headscarf and holding one of her paintings. The article told her story simply and honestly, and it mentioned where people could find her selling her art each day. The response to the newspaper article was immediate and overwhelming. That Thursday, Sophia had more visitors to her table than she had seen in all the previous weeks combined. People came specifically to find her, many of them carrying the newspaper clipping. A teacher from the local elementary school bought 3 paintings for her classroom. A businessman purchased a piece for his office. An elderly woman bought a small painting of flowers and told Sophia it reminded her of her late husband's garden. The increased attention brought in almost $800 that week, but it also brought something unexpected: criticism. Not everyone who read the article was supportive. Some people thought a 17-year-old shouldn't have to sell art to pay for medical treatment, and they blamed the healthcare system instead of helping Sophia. Others questioned whether the art was really worth the prices she was asking, suggesting that people were only buying it because they felt sorry for her. The negative comments hurt more than Sophia expected. She had poured her heart into every painting, and having people suggest that her art was only valuable because of her illness made her question everything. Carmen found her reading mean comments online one evening and immediately made her close the laptop. "Listen to me carefully," Carmen said, sitting on the edge of Sophia's bed. "Those people don't know you. They don't know your heart or your talent. The people who buy your paintings, they see something real in your work. They see beauty and hope and strength. Don't let strangers steal that from you." Despite the criticism, Sophia continued setting up her table every day she felt strong enough. She learned to focus on the positive interactions and ignore the negative ones. She started bringing a sketchbook with her and would draw while waiting for customers, often giving away the small sketches to children who seemed interested in her art. 1 month into her sidewalk art sales, Sophia had raised almost $3,000. It was more money than she had ever seen at one time, but she knew it was still just a small fraction of what they needed. The medical bills kept coming, and some days it felt like they were trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. But something else was happening that was just as important as the money. Sophia was meeting people from all walks of life, hearing their stories and realizing that everyone was fighting some kind of battle. Her art was becoming a bridge between her world and theirs, creating connections that went deeper than just buying and selling paintings. As she packed up her table one particularly cold December afternoon, having sold only one small piece that day, Sophia had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Tomorrow would bring a visitor who would see something in her art that would transform not just her own future, but the futures of many other young people facing similar battles. Tuesday started like any other difficult day for Sophia. She had spent Monday evening in the hospital getting her weekly chemotherapy treatment, and the medicine had hit her harder than usual. When she woke up that morning, her whole body felt like it was made of lead, and the room spun slightly when she tried to sit up. Carmen suggested she stay home and rest, but something inside Sophia urged her to set up her art table anyway. "I can always come home early if I need to," she told her mother. Though even getting dressed felt like an enormous task, she chose her brightest headscarf, the red one with tiny white stars, hoping it would give her energy even if she didn't feel it inside. The December morning was particularly cold, and there weren't as many people walking past the hospital as usual. Sophia set up her table slowly, taking breaks between arranging each painting. Her hands were shaking more than normal, partly from the medication and partly from the cold, making it difficult to position the artwork properly. She had brought a thermos of hot tea that Carmen had made, and she wrapped her fingers around it, grateful for the warmth. By 11 o'clock, she had sold nothing. A few people had stopped to look, including a family with young children who seemed interested in her painting of cartoon animals. But they had walked away without buying anything. Sophia was starting to think about packing up early when she noticed a man in an expensive-looking coat approaching her table. The man moved differently than most people who passed by. While others hurried past with their heads down, focused on getting wherever they needed to go, this man walked slowly and deliberately. He was probably in his 50s, well-dressed in a dark blue coat and leather shoes that looked like they cost more than Sophia's family spent on groceries in a month. But what struck her most was the way he looked at her paintings, not with the quick glance of someone being polite, but with genuine interest and attention. He stopped in front of her table and began examining each piece carefully. He picked up a small painting of a lighthouse in a storm, holding it at different angles to see how the light caught the paint. Then he moved to a larger piece showing a garden where flowers grew between cracks in concrete. Sophia watched him nervously, unsure if she should say something or wait for him to speak first. "You painted all of these yourself?" he asked finally, his voice warm but serious. "Yes, sir," Sophia replied, suddenly feeling very young and small. "I'm trying to help pay for my cancer treatment." The man nodded and continued studying her work. He spent several minutes looking at each painting, sometimes stepping back to see them from a distance, other times leaning in close to examine the brushstrokes. Sophia had never had anyone look at her art so carefully, and she wasn't sure if it was a good sign or a bad one. He paused at one painting that Sophia had completed just the week before. It showed two hands cupped together, holding a flower that was clearly dying. Its petals were brown around the edges and some had fallen away, but somehow the image still felt beautiful and hopeful. She had painted it during one of her lowest moments, when she was feeling like the sick flower herself, but had tried to capture the idea that even dying things could still have value and beauty. "This one," the man said quietly, pointing to the painting of the hands and the wilting flower. "Tell me about this one." Sophia felt her cheeks flush red. She wasn't used to explaining her art to people, especially not to someone who seemed so sophisticated and serious. "I painted it last week," she said hesitantly. "I was having a really bad day, feeling sorry for myself, I guess. But then I thought about how my mom always kept flowers in our kitchen, even when they were starting to die, because she said they were still beautiful. So I painted this to remind myself that maybe being sick doesn't mean I'm not still worth something." The man was quiet for a long moment, still looking at the painting. When he finally looked up at Sophia, she saw something in his eyes that surprised her. Not pity, which she had gotten used to seeing, but understanding, like he knew exactly what she meant. "How much for this piece?" he asked. $50, Sophia said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. The man carefully set the painting back down on the table and reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Sophia thought he was getting his wallet to buy the painting, and her heart started beating faster. But instead of pulling out money, he took out his phone. "What if I told you," he said, looking directly into her eyes, "that your art is worth far more than you're asking for it?" Sophia didn't know how to respond. People had complimented her art before, but something about the way this man said it made her feel like he wasn't just being nice. He seemed to really mean it. "I don't understand," she said finally. The man smiled for the first time since approaching her table. "My name is David Williams," he said, extending his hand for her to shake. "I know a lot about art, and I know a lot about business, and what I see here is someone with real talent who's selling herself short." David's handshake was firm and warm, and when Sophia looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her feel less afraid, kindness mixed with determination. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean," David said, "that I think we can do a lot better than $50 for a painting like this. In fact, I think we can do better than this whole setup." He gestured to her small table and folding chair. "Would you be open to hearing an idea that might help you raise a lot more money for your treatment?" Sophia's mind was racing. She had no idea who this man was or why he was interested in helping her, but something about his manner made her feel like she could trust him. Still, Carmen had always taught her to be careful of strangers, especially ones who made promises that seemed too good to be true. "What kind of idea?" she asked cautiously. David glanced around at the busy sidewalk with people walking past and the noise of traffic making it hard to have a private conversation. "It's complicated to explain here," he said, "but the short version is this. I think your art deserves to be seen by more people than just those who happen to walk by this hospital. I think we can organize something bigger, something that would help you raise the money you need and also help other young people in similar situations." Sophia felt a flutter of hope in her chest, but also a wave of doubt. This sounded too good to be true, and she had learned to be suspicious of things that seemed too good to be true. "Why would you want to help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." David was quiet for a moment, and Sophia saw something shift in his expression, a sadness that he quickly covered up. "Let's just say I have my reasons," he said gently. "But I promise you this, if you're willing to trust me, I'll make sure that trust isn't misplaced." Before Sophia could respond, David was pulling out his phone again. "First things first," he said. "I want to buy not just one painting, but your entire collection. All of it. For much more than the individual prices would add up to." Sophia felt like the world had stopped spinning. "All of it?" she whispered. "All of it," David confirmed. "For $50,000. The number hit Sophia like a physical blow. $50,000 was more money than she had ever imagined having. It was enough to make a real difference in her medical bills, enough to take some of the crushing worry off her mother's shoulders. But it was also terrifying. What if this was some kind of scam? What if David wasn't who he said he was? "I know this sounds crazy," David said, as if reading her thoughts. "But I'm going to prove to you that I'm serious. I'm going to make some phone calls right here, right now, and you're going to see that this is real. But first, do you have someone, your mom maybe, who can come down here to be part of this conversation?" Sophia nodded, still feeling like she was in a dream. "She's at work, but I could call her." "Good," David said. "Call her. Tell her to come as soon as she can. Tell her that someone wants to help, and that it's going to change everything." As Sophia dialed her mother's number with shaking fingers, she had no idea that David's plan was even bigger than buying her art. She had no idea that he was about to turn her small sidewalk art sale into something that would capture the attention of their entire city and beyond. All she knew was that for the first time since her diagnosis, she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Carmen arrived at the hospital faster than Sophia had ever seen her move. She had left work immediately after Sophia's phone call, telling her supervisor it was an emergency without explaining what kind. When she saw her daughter sitting next to a well-dressed stranger at the art table, her protective instincts kicked in immediately. "Sophia, are you okay?" Carmen asked, rushing to her daughter's side and looking suspiciously at David. "Mom, this is David Williams," Sophia said, her voice still shaky with excitement and disbelief. "He wants to buy all my paintings for $50,000. Carmen's expression shifted from worry to confusion to suspicion in the span of about 3 seconds. She had heard too many stories about people who took advantage of desperate families, and this sounded exactly like one of those situations. "Sir, I appreciate whatever you're trying to do," Carmen said carefully, "but we don't need charity from strangers." David smiled and stood up, extending his hand to Carmen just as he had to Sophia. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I completely understand your concern. If someone approached my daughter with an offer like this, I'd be suspicious too. But I'm not offering charity, and I'm not a stranger trying to take advantage of your family. I'm a businessman who recognizes real talent when I see it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Carmen. David Williams, Williams Investment Group. You can look me up online right now if you want. I've been investing in art and artists for over 20 years. And your daughter has something special. Carmen studied the business card, then looked at David, then at Sophia, who was practically bouncing in her chair with nervous energy. Even if you are who you say you are, Carmen said slowly, why would you pay so much money for paintings by a teenager? Because, David said, sitting back down and gesturing to the artwork spread across the table, these aren't just paintings by a teenager. These are works of art that tell a story. They show strength and hope and beauty in the face of terrible circumstances. People connect with that kind of authenticity, and they're willing to pay for it. He picked up the painting of the hands holding the wilting flower, the one that had first caught his attention. This piece right here could easily sell for $500 at any gallery in the city. Maybe more. Your daughter is undervaluing her work because she doesn't understand the art market. Carmen was still skeptical, but Sophia could see her mother starting to waver. And you want to buy all 20 pieces for $50,000? That's just the beginning, David said, and Sophia felt her heart skip a beat. The $50,000 is for her current collection, yes, but I have a bigger idea, something that could raise much more money and help other families facing similar situations. David pulled out his phone and showed them a photo of an elegant ballroom. I want to organize an art auction featuring Sophia's work. A formal event where people bid on her paintings with all the proceeds going toward her medical expenses and a fund to help other young cancer patients. Sophia felt like she couldn't breathe. An art auction? For her paintings? It sounded like something that happened to famous artists, not to 17-year-old girls selling art on the sidewalk. How much money are we talking about? Carmen asked. And Sophia could hear that her mother was starting to believe this might be real. Conservatively, $150,000. Maybe more. I have connections with collectors, business leaders, and philanthropists throughout the city. When they hear Sophia's story and see her art, I believe they'll respond generously. David spent the next hour explaining his plan in detail. He would donate the use of a ballroom at one of the city's nicest hotels. He would arrange for professional catering, hire an auctioneer, and invite everyone in his network of wealthy contacts. The local media would be invited to cover the event, which would help spread awareness about the challenges young cancer patients face. But here's the most important part, David said, looking directly at Sophia. This isn't about people feeling sorry for you. This is about people recognizing that you're a real artist with real talent. Yes, your story will move them, but your art has to stand on its own merit, and I believe it absolutely does. As David talked, Sophia found herself getting caught up in his enthusiasm. She imagined walking into a fancy ballroom filled with people who had come specifically to see her artwork. She pictured her paintings displayed professionally, with proper lighting and elegant frames. For the first time since getting sick, she felt like maybe cancer hadn't stolen her dreams after all. Maybe it had just changed the path to reaching them. But Carmen still had practical concerns. What's in this for you, Mr. Williams? Why would you spend your own money and time on this? David was quiet for a moment, and Sophia saw that same flash of sadness she had noticed earlier. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more personal. 15 years ago, I lost my daughter to leukemia. Rachel was Sophia's age when she died. She loved to paint too, though she wasn't nearly as talented as Sophia. He paused, looking down at his hands. I couldn't save Rachel, but maybe I can help save Sophia. And maybe together we can help save other kids who are fighting the same battle. The sidewalk around them seemed to grow quiet, even though traffic and people continued moving past. Sophia felt tears starting in her eyes. Not sad tears, but tears of gratitude and overwhelming emotion. This man, who had seemed like a stranger just an hour ago, understood exactly what she was going through because he had watched his own daughter go through it. I'm sorry about Rachel, Sophia said quietly. David smiled, and this time it was a real smile, not the polite business smile he had been wearing. Thank you. She would have loved your art, especially that painting with the flower. He looked at Carmen. So what do you think? Are you willing to let me try to help your daughter? Carmen looked at Sophia, then back at David, then at the business card she was still holding. If we do this, I want everything in writing. Contracts, agreements, everything legal and proper. Absolutely, David said. I wouldn't have it any other way. I'll have my lawyers draw up all the paperwork so you know exactly what you're agreeing to. And the $50,000 for the current paintings? Sophia asked, still hardly able to believe this was really happening. I'll write you a check right now, David said, pulling out his checkbook. Consider it an advance against what we'll raise at the auction. As David wrote out the check, Sophia felt like she was watching someone else's life. The number, $50,000, looked impossible written out in David's neat handwriting. When he handed it to Carmen, her mother stared at it for a long time before folding it carefully and putting it in her purse. There's one more thing, David said as he started making phone calls to set his plan in motion. I want to bring in a professional photographer to take pictures of Sophia with her art, and I want to contact that reporter who wrote about her for the newspaper. This story is going to be much bigger than a community interest piece. Over the next 2 hours, as Sophia and Carmen watched in amazement, David orchestrated what seemed like a miracle. He made call after call, booking the hotel ballroom, arranging for an auctioneer, contacting his list of wealthy friends and business associates. By the time they packed up Sophia's art table that afternoon, the auction was scheduled for the following Saturday, just 5 days away. 1 week from today, David said as he helped them load the paintings into Carmen's old car. Your life is going to be completely different. As they drove home, Carmen kept glancing at her purse where the check was safely tucked away. Sophia, she said finally, I think we just met an angel. Sophia looked out the car window at the ordinary street where they lived, thinking about how different everything looked now that hope had returned to their lives. In just 5 days, she would find out if David's plan would work, if her art really could save her life and help other kids too. For the first time in months, she felt like the future held possibilities instead of just fear. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Marriott had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a movie. Sophia stood at the entrance wearing a beautiful navy blue dress that David had arranged for a local boutique to donate, and she couldn't believe this was all for her. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over elegantly. Displayed artwork, her artwork, each piece, professionally framed and mounted on easels with small spotlights, highlighting the colors she had mixed in her tiny bedroom. Over 300 people filled the room, and Sophia recognized hardly any of them. There were men in expensive suits and women in elegant dresses, people who looked like they belonged at fancy events like this. But there were also families who looked more like her and Carmen, people who had read about the auction in the newspaper and wanted to support a young artist fighting cancer. The week leading up to the auction had been a whirlwind that Sophia still couldn't quite believe had really happened. David had kept every promise he made, working 18-hour days to put together an event that normally would have taken months to plan. Professional photographers had come to their apartment to take pictures of Sophia with her art. The newspaper reporter who had written the first article about her came back to do a much longer feature story that ran on the front page of the Sunday edition. Television. News crews had interviewed Sophia at the hospital, asking her about her art and her battle with cancer. Each time she tried to explain that while she was grateful for the support, she wanted people to know that her art was good enough to stand on its own, even without the story behind it. David had coached her on what to say, reminding her that she was a real artist, not just a sick girl who happened to paint. Carmen stood beside her now, wearing a black dress that made her look elegant and confident, so different from the exhausted, worried woman who had been struggling to pay medical bills just a week ago. The $50,000 check from David had allowed them to catch up on their rent and buy groceries without counting every penny. But more importantly, it had given them something they had almost lost: hope. Are you ready for this? David asked, approaching them with a warm smile. He looked perfectly at home in this fancy setting, but Sophia had learned over the past week that he was much more down to earth than his expensive clothes suggested. He had spent hours with her talking about art and life and helping her understand that what was happening tonight was just the beginning of bigger possibilities. I think so, Sophia said, though her stomach was full of butterflies. It still doesn't feel real. It's real, David assured her. And in a few minutes you're going to get up on that stage and tell all these people your story. Remember what we practiced. Speak from your heart, but also help them understand that you're an artist first and someone fighting cancer second. The auction was scheduled to begin at 7 o'clock, with Sophia giving a short speech to open the evening. As people found their seats at round tables decorated with small reproductions of her paintings, Sophia felt a mix of excitement and terror that made her hands shake slightly. At exactly 7, David stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room. The crowd quieted as he introduced himself and explained why they were all there. He spoke about the power of art to heal, to inspire, and to bring communities together. Then he introduced Sophia as not just a brave young woman fighting cancer, but as a talented artist whose work deserved recognition. Walking up to the microphone felt like the longest journey of Sophia's life. The room was completely silent, 300 faces looking at her expectantly. For a moment, she forgot everything David had coached her to say. Then she looked out at the crowd and saw Carmen in the front row, giving her an encouraging nod, and the words came naturally. 6 months ago, I thought art was just something I did for fun, Sophia began, her voice stronger than she had expected. I painted in my bedroom because it made me happy, because it helped me make sense of the world. Then I got sick, and suddenly art became something more than that. It became my way of fighting back, of proving that cancer couldn't take away who I really am. She talked about how each painting had helped her process different emotions: fear, anger, hope, determination. She explained that while she was grateful for everyone's support, she wanted them to know that her art wasn't valuable just because of her story, but because it was genuine and created with love and skill. Tonight isn't just about helping me pay for my treatment, she concluded. It's about showing other young people facing impossible situations that they don't have to give up on their dreams. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the source of our greatest strength. The applause that followed was unlike anything Sophia had ever experienced. It wasn't polite clapping, it was enthusiastic, emotional, sustained. People stood up, some wiping away tears, and Sophia realized that she had touched something deep in them, something that went beyond sympathy. The auction itself was a revelation. The auctioneer, a professional David had hired, began with some of Sophia's smaller pieces. The first painting, a simple still life of flowers that Sophia had priced at $30 on the sidewalk, sold for $450. The second went for $600. By the time they reached the larger pieces, bidding wars were breaking out across the room. One of Sophia's landscape paintings, showing a sunrise over a hospital parking lot that she had painted during one of her early treatments, sparked a particularly intense bidding war between two businessmen. The price climbed from the starting bid of $500 to $1,500, then $2,000, then $3,000. When the hammer finally came down at $4,200, the room erupted in applause. But the real surprise came when they reached the final lot of the evening, the painting of hands holding a wilting flower that had first caught David's attention. The auctioneer started the bidding at $1,000, and immediately several hands shot up around the room. The price climbed quickly: $1,500, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. Sophia watched in amazement as the number kept rising. $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. The bidding was down to two people now, an elderly woman near the back of the room and a man in an expensive suit who owned several art galleries in the city. Back and forth they went, neither willing to give up. $25,000, $30,000. The room was completely silent except for the auctioneer's voice. Finally, at $35,000, the gallery owner shook his head and withdrew from the bidding. The elderly woman had won, paying more for one painting than Sophia's family had ever seen at one time. When the auction ended, David took the stage again to announce the final total. Sophia held her breath, hardly daring to hope for the number he had predicted. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice filled with emotion, "tonight you have raised a total of $215,000 for Sophia's medical treatment and for the foundation we're establishing to help other young artists facing similar battles." The room exploded in celebration. Sophia felt her knees go weak, and Carmen had to steady her as they both cried tears of joy and disbelief. $215,000. Not only was it enough to cover all of Sophia's remaining treatment costs, but there would be money left over to help other families facing the same impossible choices they had been facing just a week ago. As people began to leave, many stopped to talk with Sophia personally. The elderly woman who had bought the flower painting introduced herself as Helen Morrison, a retired teacher who had lost her own granddaughter to cancer. She told Sophia that the painting would hang in her living room as a reminder that beauty could exist even in the darkest times. The gallery owner, who had been bidding against her, offered Sophia a show at his gallery once her treatment was complete. Several art collectors asked if she would be creating new pieces they could purchase. Most importantly, 3 other families with children fighting cancer approached her to share their stories and thank her for showing them that hope was possible. 6 months later, Sophia's cancer was in remission. The Sofia Rodriguez Foundation, established with David as chairman of the board, had already helped 12 other young artists pay for medical treatment by selling their artwork. Sophia continued creating, but now she also taught art classes at the hospital, helping other young patients find their own ways to fight back against illness and fear. The painting of the wilting flower hung in Helen Morrison's living room, where it was seen by dozens of visitors who asked about the talented young artist who had created it. Each time Helen told the story, she emphasized the same thing Sophia had said that night at the auction, that sometimes our greatest challenges become the source of our greatest strengths, and that art has the power to transform not just the artist, but everyone who experiences it. David kept a photograph from the auction in his office showing Sophia at the microphone, confident and radiant despite her headscarf and the IV port visible at her collarbone. Whenever he had difficult days at work, he looked at that picture and remembered that sometimes walking by at just the right moment and choosing to stop and really see someone can change everything. The photo sat right next to a small painting Sophia had given him, a portrait of a man and a young girl looking at artwork together, a father and daughter connected by their shared love of beauty and hope.